My name is Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. Conjure it by your own risk. I'm a wizard.
Hey everybody, it's Mike Badger. Welcome back to my den. Pull up a chair. Get comfy because today we're going to talk about Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files, books 1 to 3, Stormfront, Full Moon, Grave Peril. As my channel is new and I have no idea at any point who's going to be watching this, I'm going to break up my Dresden reviews, at least at the start, where I have a spoiler-free video where I just touch upon the books, what I really enjoyed, why I think someone who hasn't read them might like or dislike them. And then I want to have a longer form video where I go a little more in depth. And the reason why is because I've read the Dresden Files before. I'm not completely new to the series. There are many people on YouTube who have never read the Dresden Files who are giving you their first take review. I've read them before. I haven't read them recently. I want to take a bit of a deeper dive into them. Usually when I read the Dresden Files, it was always more casual, more for fun. But I don't remember all the details, and I haven't read them recently. I don't remember which book has what or who's connected to who. I think it'd be really fun to read through them, give you my current review, where I am in life. I'm a dad of 2, older, almost 30, and I started around the Proving Guilty era, which was book 8, years and years ago at this point. So my life view, my worldview is different. The way I approach books, the way I think about them, critically analyze them, all of that's different. But I make these helpful to people who haven't read the series before and are interested in the spoiler-free one. Is this something I'm interested in? Is this something entertaining? What about it is worth picking it up to read either again or for the first time? To do a spoiler one where I go more in depth. And that's where I think it'll be more interesting, because for anyone who's read the series before or is at least current as of the book review I do, they'll be able to get more of a deep dive into the book itself, maybe some of the connections that are being made over time, a lot of the weaving of the broader narrative that Jim Butcher's doing. And then you guys will let me know what you think about it as we go along. This review, we're going to start with the first 3 books. And let's kick off with Stormfront, which was originally titled Semi-Automagic, which is it's just a hilarious name. But Jim Butcher decided to go with a 2-word theme for all the books all the way through changes. Stormfront, Full Moon, 4 letters, 2 words, and Semi-Automagic didn't happen. However, what Stormfront does is it sets the tone and the stage for the series. It starts kind of at ground level, a couple dozen of floors to climb in this massive epic series that Jim Butcher's been writing for close to 20 years now. And we start at the ground level. Very simple, plain. There's an elevator in the lobby. But we're starting on the ground floor, which means we need to get introduced to what the world is, the characters, and that's what Jim Butcher's focused on with the first book. Private investigator, wizard. Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden is a private investigator who happens to be a real wizard living in Chicago. As a private investigator, he's investigating the supernatural. He does it for the cops, but he also does it just on a lark. Anyone can call him. He's in the phone book. Or whatever it would be nowadays. He doesn't use computers, so I don't know what he would do today. But back then, in 2000, I guess there still were yellow pages around or something. So he's a private investigator, uses magic and detective skills to hunt things down. Now, what Jim Butcher is doing with this series, at least at the very first book, is he's trying to do what I think Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time and a lot of the modern 80s, 90s fantasy books were doing with Lord of the Rings, which is that they're modernizing Lord of the Rings, but they're also paying homage and they're correcting or progressing certain aspects about the trendsetter that was done historically. So he's doing that for the noir genre, which he clearly has a love for because there's so many puns and references to the detective noir genre. And he himself has admitted, if you ever watch interviews with him, he's a huge fan of the Spencer series, Sherlock, Philip Marlowe, a number of the noir genre detective characters, novels, etc. He does that. He pulls together a lot of their best parts and tries to overcome or present in a different light some of their weaker aspects. And I think it does a really good job of this. If you haven't heard of Dresden Files before, that's the pitch. Private detective, investigator, wizard. He is a wise ass. He is a fast talker. He is smart, but not too smart. He's a fighter, toughs out a bunch of situations, pretty girl, all the typical beat to beats that you would expect. However, it's pulpy, it's fun, and it's very well done, especially for a first novel. Harry as a character, that's what the establishment really of this book is, to establish Harry as the character, facing a rival who's similar to him, a wizard, except unlike where Harry tries to do good or is working towards good, the bad guy is very much bad, evil wizard. Full Moon, Grave Peril changed the formula, but with Stormfront, Harry Dresden's facing himself if he were evil in a mirror style setup, which I think was a good way to start the series because it avoids a lot of the wider world building, a lot of the fantastical elements. Don't have to worry about those. Harry, he's got a thing for damsels in distress. He can't ever seem to pay his rent on time. He can't get a haircut. He wouldn't know a fashionable clothing item if it wrapped itself around his head and choked him to death. He's kind of out of his element a lot of the time. And you think, since we're from his perspective, you think, okay, I can figure this out. I know what's going on. He really doesn't. He really doesn't for a lot of the book. And it's great. It's a thrill ride because it never feels like Harry's obviously stupid. He makes some calls or some decisions where the reader's probably a little bit ahead of him just because that's Jim Butcher's the amateur nature of the writing. He has to seed certain things that we as readers pick up faster than the character can. Otherwise, it would just end. But overall, I thought it was pretty well done. And I think Butcher's strengths at this point in the series, in the very beginning, he has a love and detail for the noir. He's really funny on the page. He's got a great rapport. His dialogue is solid. It's a little caricaturized at the very beginning, especially between Harry and Detective Murphy, who's the police investigator. There's a bunch of tension and struggle between the two of them. Comedic element of Harry always coming up with jokes to offset some of the gallow humor and some of the really dark, disturbing aspects of what this evil wizard is doing. It's necessary. It gives you a bit of a laugh, gives you a break from the somberness. And I think that's one of the things that make the book succeed. The atmosphere is very well done. There's some horror elements that we'll get to for books 2 and 3. And as characters are introduced, even though they're somewhat caricaturized, they feel painted in place. You got your pleasantly unpleasant mafia boss. You got the toughest nails cop chick. You got the escort services vampiress. This is book 1. And what's interesting is that even by the time you get to book 3, over the course of these 3 books, Jim Butcher manages to make these seemingly one-dimensional characters, starts to flesh them out and give them motives and give them a little bit more depth. So yes, it's a little bit of, you have to work through these early books, but even within the 3 of them, I think there's a lot of payoff that comes from following these characters, giving them a chance, giving Butcher a chance to seed a lot of their development. One of the challenges of the first-person writing is that you don't know what anybody else's mind is thinking, but it still works where you get a good sense of these other characters. I think it comes down to some of the technical aspects that Jim Butcher does with Harry, making him as an investigator more attuned and looking for certain things in body language, in character emotions, little facial expressions. He's able to call those out and it be believable because Harry's a private detective. He's supposed to be able to notice those sort of things, but it gives a little more life to characters that would otherwise be on the outside of the first person point of view. And so I think Stormfront, of the first 3, Stormfront was my favorite. I think it's the hook. It'll sell you. And so there's some stuff that you might be like, I've seen this before. I don't care for that. But there's enough in there. There's enough of the wizard component. There's enough of the world building and the character development that I think it'll work. And so let's move into Full Moon and Grave Peril. Both Full Moon and Grave Peril, unlike Stormfront, I think they suffer from the monster of the week feeling. Whereas the first one felt like a mirror component where we got to see the darker side of who Harry might be if it was manifest and went down a darker road. And it really starts to establish that Harry has some darker impulses. That's already been established. And that mirror works very well, even if the villain is kind of silly. Full Moon, it's the werewolf book. It's where he gets to introduce and lay the groundwork for werewolves in the Dresden series. This is somewhat the formula side of the Dresden Files, where in the early books, each one is Jim Butcher setting the stage for the future, which means that he has to introduce an aspect of the world. We also were introduced to vampires for the first time, and in book 2, we get introduced to werewolves. He has 4 different kinds of werewolves, and they have enough variances that it's a twist on the werewolf genre, so to speak, where he takes a lot of pieces from werewolves throughout history and kind of builds them into his own balanced arc, where you have your super werewolf, you have your humans as werewolves, you have your cursed werewolves, you have your use a tool belt werewolves to become werewolves and then not be werewolves. It makes for a lot of variance in a very short book. The book is, I think, one of the shortest in the series. Maybe it's 200 something page. I don't know. It was very short. The case itself was okay. It wasn't great. It's, from what I can remember, it's got to be one of the weaker books in the series. It's really not as funny. There's very little humor. I was making notes as I went through. There wasn't a whole lot of humor in book 2. I think that's the point, but it weakens that balance from book 1, the balance of humor versus atmosphere, horror. There's also a lot of Harry and Murphy tension. It doesn't come across well. It feels like they're being forced into conflict in a way that doesn't feel natural. It feels a little forced. It feels like they're repeating themselves. It's the same, like, I told you this. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. No, I mean, you're under arrest. Like, I found it a little bit childish. It's not working for me in book 2. But the horror elements were great. There's a massive climactic middle of the book mini boss scene, a massive monster that's just killer. I can just visualize it on screen. It's very well written, super tense, close quarters with a monster, and that was probably the best part of the overall book for me, was that mini boss scene. And I thought the ending didn't work for me. It fell a bit flat at the very end of the book. I think that this is where Jim Butcher was trying for the first time the monster of the week, and was just trying to get his feet under him, get the books out at this point. Getting to Grave Peril, which is where the series begins to open up in a big way. It's a way more complicated plot. I think that's Butcher's main change. As an author, this is where he's like, okay, I've established stuff. Now I got to start opening things up. I got to make the stakes. I got to raise the stakes, got to build the wider world that I'm going to set up. And this is the book that does it. Like books 1 and 2, the writing is a little more amateur, but he's able to step up his game. He builds really good empathetic relationships between characters. And one thing I think Jim Butcher establishes here, a stake in the ground, since Harry has so many struggles personally with his relationships and his life, are able to ground him. And we get introduced to 2 characters very much not only in love, but they're establishing and maintaining a family. They have good, clear moral values, wants to have good role models, devout people with families. And as a father with children trying to establish a house and a home, I really appreciated that he's taking a stab at doing that, at making really solid, lovable characters within a world like this that's very often very dark and very gray, and yet build these characters in as an offset to the darkness in a way that many others don't. So I love that about it. I also really loved how the third book is the monster of the week, is Dresden take on hauntings and ghosts and nightmares, and how those aspects of the spiritual and play into the real world and what happens when things go wrong there. So the third book, though, the focal point of it builds to a massive climactic moment later in the book that it has long-term ripples, and there's a bunch of world and plot oriented changes that happen by the end of this book that have way more impact than we've had in the first 2 books, which felt very localized. And good for Harry, maybe, that he survived the books, but not setting up much beyond. And so if you haven't seen my Should I Read the Dresden Files video, I'd suggest you check that out to see if the broader series might be for you. If, in terms of my recommendation there, I'll repeat it here, which is if you haven't read the series before, really give book 1 a try. Start with Stormfront, push your way through Full Moon and Grave Peril. If you like Stormfront, you're not sold on Full Moon and Grave Peril because, as I said, they're weaker books, then my personal recommendation is to start Summer Night, which is book 4, not to jump to book 7 like you'll see on the internet. If you look around, most people, including Jim Butcher himself, would probably say check out book 7 because that's designing the book to be an entry point in the wider series. So you could start there and get a full feel of Dresden Files, where Jim is a significantly better writer. However, I think you lose an awful lot between book 4 and 7. Certainly books 4 and 5. There's a tremendous amount of character and world building that if you get to book 7 and then you just continue on, it's going to weaken a lot of the later impact in the series. Read book 1, you start book 2, you're like, I don't care for it. Skip to book 4. If you still don't care for book 4, fine, you jump to book 7. If you haven't gotten to that point, that's why I would suggest to watch the video should you read it, because hopefully that'll anticipate whether it's even something you'll be interested in, and you won't have to fumble your way through the different books to figure out if it works for you. And at the end of the day, I would rank these first 3, Stormfront's the best in my opinion as both an entry point as well as setting up the series. I think it does a better job at groundwork, whereas Grave Peril does a lot more for the overall world. It also has a tremendous amount crammed into one place. A very ambitious book, and it comes across that way. It's definitely not as well paced. It felt like Jim had to rush it. And book 2 is, of the first 3, the weakest. If you love werewolves, I think you'll enjoy it anyway. Otherwise, if you end up skipping it, I don't think you lose a whole lot. In fact, you probably will enjoy the Harry-Karen relationship better, probably if you skip it. But you'll miss a few really cool moments, as well as you'll miss some of the world building that he's building up that will probably come back later in the series. And so I'm curious what you guys think. Have you guys started it? Have you tried it? Have you read it? If you haven't tried it before, I hope this review is helpful. You get a sense of the books and a sense of what I like and don't like about the series, and we'll pick it up and give it a try. And post comments. Anybody who's posting comments, this is a spoiler-free review. If you want to chat about it and give me your thoughts and hear my deeper thoughts about it, then head over to the spoiler video, which will be linked in this video, and you can find it on the channel, of course. And that's where I'm happy to have a big discussion about it. I'm going to go much more in depth on the actual book itself in that video. If you enjoy book reviews and my thoughts on it, then you can go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you'll know when more of these videos are coming out. This channel is new, I'm learning a lot, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it. And otherwise, stay tuned for the next video. Mike Badger signing out. I'll see you guys next time.